Okay, so in this presentation I want to cover some of the basics of fueling in your training, and because we're on a training camp there's a particular example I want to give you just purely because we come here with a range of different aims, don't we, in terms of training, maybe nutrition. So I'll take you through some theory and some examples. Just to start off with this slide here though, if we talk about the topic of training for sports performance, and in particular fueling for that training for sports performance, there are two areas I suppose that we're trying to think about. The first part over there, we're talking about the training session itself. There's then the second component, which is optimising that training and the training effect. Okay, so it's not just about fueling while you're on the ride, it's also thinking about how can you magnify that training effect while you're out on the ride as well. Predominantly today, I'm going to talk about the training session itself and getting that balance between energy and also the hydration, just the fluid itself. So some of the things that we're going to talk a little bit about are the energy provision and the hydration, and also a little bit about the pace judgment and how that might affect your energy supply. So today, quite a lot of variability in the ride. It's actually going to burn through a lot more carbohydrate than a steady intensity ride. Okay, it's because you're going above and below your lactate threshold. Now, because we're on a camp, I thought it would be a good idea to talk about one issue that maybe is something that we're all balancing up while we're here, and commonly something that we all try to balance during our winter training generally. And this is really about, we're trying to establish a good aerobic base, but also it's a good time to be thinking about trimming down the body fat, thinking about increasing lean body mass. And I think there's probably quite a few of us in the room that would be trying to use that winter's training to make sure we go into the race season feeling as lean as we possibly can. Yeah? Okay, so that might be a typical scenario, but if we're not careful, it's going to turn into a lose-lose situation where you're trying to juggle these two different needs to training and maybe some weight loss, getting that increase in lean body mass. If you're trying to do both, try to juggle both, you can actually impact more, doing more damage on both, because you end up compromising. So let's think about a 68 kilogram female as an example. She wants to lose 3 kilograms, but there's also that desire to increase power output, and here I've just given an example of maximal minute power going up from 300 to 330 watts. And this is very, very typical data within high standard of female cyclists within the UK. So this isn't an atypical example I'm going to give you here. I think it's worth just mentioning, looking at both sides of the equation of that good old power to weight ratio. So let's say this athlete is going to say they're going to spend the whole winter concentrating on the weight loss side of the equation. It means they're going to keep their performance at 300 watts, they're going to lose 3 kilo, and their power to weight ratio comes out about 4.6 watts per kilo at maximum. What about if they focus on the power output increase instead? So they're going to stay at 68 kilograms, all their training and nutrition is geared to that, and instead they actually aim to try and increase the maximum minute power by 30 watts. You can see there the effect on the power to weight ratio is actually greater if we concentrate on power and forget losing the body mass. You can see where we're coming from here. Let's think of utopia. What about you get both? Massive increase in power to weight ratio up to 5.07. Okay. You might well have seen some of these figures before. To lose about a pound of fat, you need to have an energy deficit of about 3,000 kilocalories, okay? And we know that the average female needs about 2,000 kilocalories. This is a kilocalorie demand based on normal active lifestyle. So not a sedentary individual, because you probably come across all the Weight Watchers diets that recommend more like 1200 or 1500, but this is someone who's still active. So to lose 3 kilos in 12 weeks, just do the maths through, quite a lot of kilocalorie total deficit required over that period, but actually, if you just chip away at it, it's 200 kilocalories a day. If for a moment we look at the training that this particular athlete can do, they're going to be doing about 10 hours over 5 sessions a week. So again, very, very typical of the kind of training structure that a lot of people find themselves in. And again, using typical data, 175 watts is a lactate threshold value. You're going to be burning in the region of 700 kilocalories an hour at that rate, okay? It's all fine so far? Keeping up with the maths? Now it's worth at this point just considering fuel use per hour. And these are very typical values that you'd see in any exercise physiology textbook. I'll talk you through the figures because I appreciate they're probably a bit blurry. But you think of our rider, lactate threshold of 175 watts. If we look at the figure here, 180 watts, they're getting about 40 grams of fat per hour going towards exercise intensity, and about another 40 grams of carbohydrate. Now, you've probably all come across that fat burning intensity, and we're going to come on to this in a moment when I talk about fueling your rides with water alone. There's this misnomer that if you exercise at low intensity, it's all about fat burning. Yes, a greater proportion of the energy comes from fat, but in terms of absolute terms, you're probably going to burn more fat by exercising closer to your lactate threshold. And if you work closer to your lactate threshold, you burn more total calories, don't you, as well, because the intensity is higher. It's worth just keeping that graph in your mind.
Sorry, Helen, what was the straight line?
That's just heart rate.
Okay.
Just showing that exercise intensity is going up linearly there. So we know that there's about 120 grams of deliverable energy per hour going into the system. You've got about 80 grams worth of energy in terms of fat, carbohydrate, and we also know that we can top it up with drinking as well. So total kilocalories expended in a week from the training load is going to be in the order of that 7,000 kilocalorie amount. Again, multiply that up by 12 weeks, and you've got another big figure. So, to stay at 68 kilos, if we look at the total kilocalories that I've just mentioned there, just under 83,000. And we also take into account the basal kilocalorie intake, because remember, this is all about what you're doing in exercise. There's also underlying a basal metabolic rate as well. This is just the kilocalories from turning the pedals. So over 12 weeks, that's your total figure, and you can see it's about 3,000 kilocalories a day if you're doing a reasonable training load. I'm not going to get into how efficient some people are at burning energy. I'll leave that for now. So, 3,000 kilocalories a day. That's to stay at 68 kilos. What if you wanted to drop 3 kilograms, as we know this athlete wants to do? Well, what we need to do is somehow alter the balance by about 200 kilocalories a day, because that seems to be the amount, according to the research, that's sustainable and effective, because you're more likely to be able to just chip away a little bit. 2 slices of bread a day, take that out, you're more likely to keep that than cutting all your meals out. So what would you do? Eat less or ride for a little bit longer? Or maybe a bit of both? which is the best way? Well, I guess really for you, the things to weigh up are the time that you've got available. Have you got time to do the greater training? If you do the higher amount of training, you've also got the consequence of a higher metabolic rate after training as well. And this is why there's another reason why all that fat burning intensity, going out for zone 1 rides for 8 hours, yes, you might be burning a lot of fat, but you can probably go out and burn as much fat if you do 4 hours at higher intensity. And in fact, this is a conversation that myself and Dan were having with Nick, who we met up for a ride with on Friday. He was telling us about his teammates, his traditional French teammates who go out, and they were all out for the last 2 weeks, and they were going out and doing 7-8 hour rides. Nick was coming back, 4 hour rides, job done, more recovery, goes out and does the same thing day in, day out. So there's still a lot of myths to dispel about this fat burning, even as high as in the pro ranks. I'm sure most of you have come across this in magazines, kind of cycling or training folklore. Training on water alone helps you burn more body fat. And this, I'm really talking about riding on water alone in the longer rides. I don't necessarily, I wouldn't say strongly that you need to take carbohydrate out on any ride of less than an hour. Really, it's after an hour that you start to need the carbohydrate intake coming in, because hopefully you'll have fueled well in your pre-training meals to get you through that initial hour. So if you're on the turbo for an hour, don't worry about mixing up 60 grams of PSP. Chances are you're not going to need it, and that then is an excess calorie intake. Different if you're doing a high intensity session, by the way, but we're talking more about the kind of like the zone 2 intensity here. So riding on water alone compared to riding using carbohydrates. Well, again, just to remind you of the magic figures, roughly 700 kilocalories an hour, and we know that the body can take in approximately 60 grams of carbohydrate in that time as well. There are 4 kilocalories in every gram of carbohydrates. We know there we get 240 kilocalories worth in your bottle.